Story 1. The Mirror Convoy. Jake Martinez had been hauling freight across the interstate for 17 years, and in all that time, he'd learned to trust his instincts. The I-80 stretch between Des Moines and Omaha was his regular route. A ribbon of asphalt he could navigate in his sleep. On the night of October 14, 2019, those instincts started screaming at him to pull over, but what he saw in his mirrors kept him glued to his seat in sheer terror. It started around 2:47 a.m. according to his dashboard clock. The highway was empty, which wasn't unusual for a Tuesday night. Jake was hauling refrigerated pharmaceuticals, keeping his rig at a steady 70 miles per hour. His CB radio crackled with the occasional trucker checking in from other routes, but his stretch of road remained eerily quiet. The fall air had turned cold, and a light fog had begun creeping across the fields on either side of the interstate. That's when he first noticed the headlights in his side mirror. Another semi had pulled up alongside him in the left lane, matching his speed exactly. Jake glanced over, expecting to see another driver, maybe looking to pass or just keeping pace for company. The cab was dark, but he could make out a figure behind the wheel. Something felt off immediately. The truck was identical to his own, same model Kenworth W900, same dark blue paint, even the same rust spot near the rear wheel well that Jake had been meaning to fix for months. Jake's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He told himself it was coincidence that plenty of truckers drove the same model. But then he noticed the license plate. In the dim glow of his running lights, he could just make out the numbers, the exact same sequence as his own. His heart began hammering in his chest. Jake eased off the accelerator, expecting the other truck to pull ahead. It slowed down with him, maintaining the perfect parallel position. He sped up to 75. The mirror truck accelerated in perfect synchronization. For 5 full minutes, Jake tried varying his speed, faster, slower, sudden changes, and the truck beside him matched every single adjustment with inhuman precision. The fog grew thicker, reducing visibility to maybe 100 yards. Jake grabbed his CB radio. "Breaker, breaker, this is Nighthawk on I-80 westbound, mile marker 143. Anyone else seeing another rig out here?" Static answered him. He tried again. More static, but this time it sounded almost like breathing, deep, rhythmic exhalations that made his skin crawl. He forced himself to look at the mirror truck again. The driver's window was now rolled down, and what he saw made his blood freeze. The figure behind the wheel was him. Not someone who looked like him. It was him, down to the scar on his left cheek from a childhood bicycle accident. The same flannel shirt he was wearing, even the same day's worth of stubble on his jaw. The other Jake was staring straight ahead, hands at 10 and 2 on, the steering wheel expressionless. Jake's breathing became shallow and rapid. He considered slamming on the brakes, but something told him that would be a terrible mistake. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, the broken white lines disappearing into the fog like a conveyor belt feeding him into oblivion. He checked his GPS. It showed him exactly where he should be. But the exit he knew should be coming up in 2 miles wasn't appearing on the display anymore. Then he noticed movement in his passenger side mirror. His stomach dropped. Another truck had appeared on his right side, another identical blue Kenworth, another copy of himself behind the wheel. This one was looking at him, and its eyes were completely black, reflecting nothing, absorbing everything. "This isn't happening," Jake whispered, but his voice sounded wrong in the cab, hollow and distant. He tried the CB again. "Please, somebody, anybody, I need help on I-80. Something's wrong." The static shifted into something worse, a voice that might have been his own, speaking words he couldn't quite make out, like listening to a recording played backward. More trucks appeared, one behind him matching his speed exactly 2 car lengths back. Then another and another. Within minutes, Jake was surrounded by a convoy of identical rigs, each driven by a version of himself. Some of the drivers looked normal. Others had subtle wrongnesses. Mouths that opened too wide, heads that turned at impossible angles, hands with too many fingers gripping the steering wheels. The fog became so dense that Jake could barely see 20 feet ahead. The trucks around him remained perfectly visible, their running lights cutting through the murk with unnatural clarity. He noticed that despite the fog, his convoy cast no reflections on the wet pavement. They glided along the highway like ghosts, silent except for the synchronized rumble of their engines that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Jake's truck began to slow down on its own. He pressed the accelerator. Nothing happened. The brake pedal was equally unresponsive. The convoy was controlling his vehicle now, keeping him locked in this perfect formation. His speedometer dropped to 60, then 50, then 40. The convoy maintained formation, slowing with mechanical precision. Then he saw it through the fog, something massive ahead, a structure that had no business existing on this empty stretch of interstate. It looked like a truck stop, but impossibly large, its parking lot stretching away into the fog like an endless grid. Hundreds, maybe thousands of identical blue Kenworth trucks were parked in perfect rows, their cabs dark and empty. A neon sign flickered overhead, but the letters kept rearranging themselves into sequences that hurt to look at. The convoy began to guide him toward an empty parking spot. Jake's rational mind screamed at him to do something, anything. In a moment of desperate clarity, he remembered the emergency exit handle on his door. His hand shot out and grabbed it, yanking hard. The door flew open, and without thinking, Jake threw himself out of the moving cab. He hit the pavement hard, rolling and scraping across the rough asphalt. Pain exploded through his shoulder and hip, but the adrenaline kept him moving. He scrambled to his feet and ran toward the shoulder of the highway, away from the convoy and that impossible truck stop. Behind him, he heard the synchronized hiss of air brakes, and when he dared to look back, all the trucks had stopped. Every single driver was turned in their seat watching him. They all moved in unison, reaching for their door handles. Jake ran into the fog-shrouded field beside the highway, tall grass whipping at his legs. He ran until his lungs burned, until he couldn't hear the highway anymore, until the fog finally began to thin. When he looked back, there was nothing. No trucks, no impossible truck stop, just empty interstate disappearing into the distance. He walked for 3 hours before a state trooper found him on a county road, disoriented and injured. His truck was discovered parked normally at a rest stop 15 miles back, engine cold, cargo intact. According to his trip log and GPS data, he'd never deviated from his route. The dash camera showed him driving alone the entire night. No convoy, no fog, nothing unusual. But Jake knows what he saw. He found proof when he got home, in the photos on his phone that he didn't remember taking. Dozens of images of that parking lot full of identical trucks, all time-stamped to that night. And in the background of one photo, barely visible through the fog, he could see hundreds of versions of himself standing between the trucks, all staring at the camera. Jake Martinez quit long-haul trucking that week. He sold his rig and took a job at a local warehouse where he works day shifts and makes sure he's home before sunset. He still drives, but only during daylight and never on I-80. Sometimes, late at night, he'll hear the distant rumble of a truck engine outside his house. When he looks out the window, there's nothing there, but in the morning he'll find tire tracks in his driveway that match his old Kenworth exactly. Tracks that circle his house 3 times before leading back toward the highway. Story 2. The Breathing Cargo. Sandra Delacroix specialized in hauling unusual freight, which is how she ended up with the contract that nearly destroyed her sanity. With 23 years of experience and a spotless safety record, she'd transported everything from livestock to hazardous materials across the Canadian provinces. but the shipment she picked up from a remote facility outside Thunder Bay, Ontario on March 8, 2021, was different from anything she'd encountered before. The facility itself raised her first red flag. It wasn't marked on any map, just coordinates sent to her dispatch tablet that led to an unmarked access road off Highway 527. The building was a featureless concrete cube surrounded by empty parking lots and security fencing that seemed excessive for such an isolated location. No company name, no signage, just a number painted on the loading bay door. 7. A man in an unmarked uniform met her at the gate, checked her credentials, and guided her to the loading dock without saying a single word. The cargo was already sealed in her trailer. 48 identical black crates, each about 4 feet cubed, strapped down with redundant securing systems. The bill of lading simply read, "Biological research materials, temperature sensitive, do not open." Her destination was a similar facility outside Montreal, a straight shot east on the Trans-Canada Highway, approximately 1,500 kilometers. The man handed her a sealed envelope. "Instructions for the route," he said, his first and only words to her. "Follow them exactly. Do not deviate. Do not stop except at the designated checkpoints. Do not open the trailer doors for any reason until delivery. You'll be paid triple your usual rate." Sandra had hauled enough mysterious cargo to know when questions wouldn't be answered. The money was legitimate, already deposited in her account as verified by her bank app. She signed the papers, climbed into her cab, and started the long drive east. The first 4 hours were uneventful. Sandra made good time on Highway 527 before merging onto the Trans-Canada. The March weather was cold but clear, roads dry, traffic minimal. Her refrigeration unit hummed steadily, maintaining the precise temperature specified in her instructions. Exactly 4.4 degrees Celsius, not a tenth of a degree higher or lower. Around 9:30 p.m., somewhere between Wawa and Sault Ste. Marie, she heard the first sound from the trailer. It came through the cab's internal monitoring system, a soft thump, like something shifting in the cargo area. Sandra checked her tablet. All straps showed secure, temperature stable, no alerts. She turned up the monitoring system's audio sensitivity. 10 minutes later, another thump, then another. They weren't random. They had a rhythm, slow and steady, about 1 every 8 seconds. Sandra's hands tightened on the wheel. Cargo shifted sometimes, she told herself. Vibrations from the road, thermal expansion, perfectly normal. But the thumps didn't sound like shifting cargo. They sounded deliberate. Then she heard something that made her blood run cold. A breath. Long, deep, and wet, it rattled through the monitoring system's speakers. Then another breath. And another. Whatever was in those crates was breathing, and the rhythm matched the thumps exactly. Sandra grabbed her CB radio. "Breaker, breaker, this is Northern Star on the Trans-Canada eastbound, mile marker 487. I need to contact my dispatcher about my cargo." She gave her company ID and requested a direct line. The response came quickly, her dispatcher's voice, but strained, rehearsed. "Northern Star, you are not to stop or open the trailer. Continue to Montreal as instructed. This is normal for your cargo type. Acknowledge." Normal? "Tom, there's something alive back there. The bill said research materials." "Acknowledge the instruction, Sandra." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Please, just drive. Don't look, don't stop. Get it to Montreal and this will all be over." The line went dead. Sandra tried calling back, but her radio produced only static. Her cell phone showed no signal, despite passing through areas where she'd always had coverage before. The breathing grew louder. It wasn't coming from just one source anymore. It sounded like all 48 crates were breathing in perfect unison, a chorus of wet, labored inhalations and exhalations that filled her cab through the speakers. She turned the monitoring system off, but she could still hear it, muffled but persistent, through the thin wall separating the cab from the trailer. Around midnight, the temperature alarm blared. Sandra's heart jumped into her throat. The trailer temperature was climbing. 4.5 degrees, 4.7, 5.0. She adjusted the refrigeration unit to maximum, but the temperature continued to rise. The instructions had been explicit: maintain exactly 4.4 degrees. She didn't want to think about what would happen if she failed. The breathing changed. It became faster, more excited, almost eager. The thumps increased in frequency and intensity, the entire trailer shaking with impacts that shouldn't have been possible from secured cargo. Sandra pushed her rig faster, the speedometer climbing to 130 kilometers per hour on the dark highway. Then she heard the voice. It came through the disabled monitoring system speakers, through her shut-off CB radio, through her phone's speaker even though it was turned off. A whisper at first, then multiple whispers overlapping, speaking words in a language she didn't recognize. The sounds were wet and gurgling, as if whatever spoke them had mouths full of fluid. The trailer's internal camera, she'd forgotten about it. Sandra pulled up the feed on her dashboard tablet with shaking hands. The image was grainy and dark, but she could see the cargo area. The crates were moving. Not shifting, moving deliberately, pulsing and flexing like they were breathing. Dark fluid was seeping from the seams, pooling on the trailer floor. And in that fluid she could see movement, things writhing and coiling just beneath the surface. One of the crates cracked open. Just a few inches, but enough. What emerged wasn't anything Sandra had words for. It was flesh and not flesh, solid and liquid simultaneously, with too many appendages that bent in too many directions. It probed the air with things that might have been fingers or tentacles or tongues. And then it reached for the next crate, deliberately opening it from the outside. Sandra screamed and threw the tablet onto the passenger seat. She couldn't look anymore. The temperature in the trailer had reached 8 degrees and was still climbing. The breathing was so loud now that it drowned out her engine noise, a rhythmic roaring that seemed to shake her entire truck. The whispers became screams, dozens of voices shrieking in that unknown language, and underneath it all, she heard her name, Sandra, drawn out impossibly long. A checkpoint appeared ahead, one of the designated stops mentioned in her instructions. A small building next to the highway, lit by harsh fluorescent lights. 2 figures in hazmat suits stood by the road, waving her down urgently. Sandra nearly sobbed with relief. She pulled over, slamming on the brakes harder than she should have. The hazmat figures approached quickly, one going to the trailer, the other to her window. "How long has it been active?" the figure asked, voice muffled by the suit. "Active? It started breathing hours ago, and now." "You were supposed to keep it at exactly 4.4 degrees. The figure's tone was accusatory. "The warmth wakes them up. We need to resedate and resecure. Stay in your cab." Sandra watched in her mirrors as they opened the trailer doors. A cloud of that dark fluid poured out, steaming in the cold night air. The hazmat figures worked quickly, using equipment she didn't recognize, spraying something into the trailer that caused the breathing to slow and eventually stop. It took them 40 minutes to reseal everything and adjust the temperature back down. The figure returned to her window. "You can continue. The temperature system was sabotaged at the origin point. We've repaired it. You'll make it to Montreal now without further incidents. But Sandra, if you value your life and sanity, you will never speak about what you've heard or seen tonight. You will deliver this cargo, collect your payment, and forget this ever happened. Understand?" She nodded mutely. What else could she do? The rest of the drive to Montreal was silent. The cargo didn't make another sound. Sandra delivered the trailer to another unmarked facility as instructed, watched as they unloaded it with the same mysterious efficiency, and received her payment. Triple rate, as promised, plus a substantial bonus listed as discretionary compensation. Sandra Delacroix still drives trucks, but she only hauls conventional cargo now. Furniture, electronics, building materials. She turned down every subsequent high-paying, mysterious job that came her way. But sometimes, late at night when she's alone in her cab, she hears it again. That wet, rhythmic breathing so faint she can almost convince herself it's just the wind or her imagination. And once, when her refrigeration unit malfunctioned and the temperature climbed above 4.4 degrees, she heard the whispers start again, speaking her name from somewhere in the empty trailer behind her. She sold that truck the next day. Story 3. The Road That Eats Time. Marcus Washington had been driving long-haul for Peterson Freight Lines for 31 years, and he thought he knew every trick and trap the road could throw at him. The veteran trucker had over 3 million miles under his belt, a pristine safety record, and a reputation for always delivering on time. Route 50 through Nevada was one of his regular runs, a desolate stretch they called the loneliest road in America, for good reason. On the night of June 23, 2020, Marcus learned that some roads are lonely for reasons best left undiscovered. He'd left Salt Lake City at 4 p.m. with a load of restaurant equipment bound for Sacramento. The route took him southwest through Utah before cutting across Nevada on Highway 50. By 10 p.m. he was deep in the Nevada desert, watching the sun disappear behind distant mountains and leaving him with nothing but his headlights and the endless painted line dividing the two-lane highway. The GPS showed him passing through Eureka, a tiny desert town, at 10:47 p.m. Marcus barely noticed it, a few scattered lights, a gas station, nothing memorable. He had a fresh thermos of coffee, good music on his playlist, and another 6 hours of driving ahead. The highway stretched before him, empty and straight, disappearing into the darkness beyond his high beams. At 11:15 p.m., according to his dashboard clock, he passed through Eureka again. Same gas station, same scattered lights, same water tower with the distinctive rust stain running down the western side. Marcus's first thought was that he'd gotten turned around somehow. But his GPS showed him traveling west, making good progress toward Austin, the next town on his route. His odometer confirmed he'd traveled another 43 miles since the first time through Eureka. Must be another town that looks similar, he muttered to himself, but the explanation felt wrong. That water tower rust stain was distinctive, and the gas station had the same broken E in its neon sign. He drove on, pushing the coincidence out of his mind. The desert night was cloudless, stars brilliant overhead, temperature dropping into the comfortable 60s. His truck hummed along smoothly, no mechanical issues, fuel gauge showing 3/4 of a tank. Everything was normal. At 11:43 p.m., he passed through Eureka a third time. Marcus pulled over this time, heart pounding. He checked his GPS carefully. It showed him 76 miles west of his first Eureka sighting, well past Austin, approaching the next town. But the buildings outside his window were definitely Eureka. Same everything. He took out his phone and photographed the gas station with its broken neon sign, time-stamping the image. He grabbed his CB radio. "Breaker, breaker, this is Desert Storm on Route 50 westbound. Anybody out there?" Static answered him, but it had a strange quality, almost rhythmic, like waves on a beach. "I'm experiencing some navigation issues on 50. Can anyone confirm their position?" A voice crackled through, male and rough. "Desert Storm, this is Midnight Runner. I'm on 50 eastbound, just passed through Austin heading for Eureka. You still got a ways to go." "Negative, Midnight Runner. I've passed through Eureka 3 times in the last 40 minutes. Something's wrong with this stretch of road." Silence then. "Son, I've been driving this route for 20 years. There's only one Eureka on Highway 50. You been drinking?" "Stone sober. I'm telling you, something isn't right." The CB cut to static mid-sentence, that same rhythmic quality, and wouldn't transmit again no matter what Marcus tried. He pulled back onto the highway, determined to push through whatever was happening. His fuel gauge still read 3/4 full despite having driven for over an hour. That's when the real fear set in. Marcus tapped the gauge with his finger. The needle didn't budge. He checked his odometer. It had stopped advancing. His dashboard clock still worked, ticking over to 11:58 p.m., but every other measurement of distance or consumption had frozen. The highway remained absolutely empty. No other vehicles, no animals, not even insects hitting his windshield. Just the endless asphalt and the darkness pressing against his windows like something solid. At 12:31 a.m., he passed through Eureka for the 4th time. Marcus was breathing hard now, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. He tried turning around, but when he completed the U-turn and headed back east, the town appeared ahead of him instead of behind, and his GPS still insisted he was traveling west. Direction had become meaningless. He tried every side road and turnoff, but they all curved back to the main highway within minutes, always depositing him on the westbound lane just outside Eureka. The town itself seemed deserted, lights on in buildings, but no movement, no people, no cars parked on the streets. It was like a movie set, realistic but lifeless. By 2 a.m., Marcus had passed through Eureka 17 times. He'd counted, marking each passage on a notepad to keep himself anchored to something concrete. His coffee thermos was still full despite drinking from it regularly. His fuel gauge hadn't moved. The dashboard clock kept advancing, but he was trapped in a loop of space that made no sense. Then he noticed the town was changing. Subtle things at first. The gas station's broken E was fixed. Then it was broken again, but differently, with the bottom bar missing instead of the top. The water tower's rust stain moved to the eastern side. Buildings appeared that hadn't been there before, then vanished on the next loop. Marcus started seeing people. They stood motionless on street corners watching his truck pass. They all looked similar. Average height, average build, faces that were somehow generic and interchangeable. And they all wore the same neutral expression, heads turning to track his movement with mechanical precision. On his 23rd passage through Eureka at 3:47 a.m., one of the people was standing in the middle of the highway. Marcus slammed on his brakes, the trailer fishtailing slightly before he regained control. The figure stood perfectly still, illuminated by his headlights. It was a man in ordinary clothes, jeans, a gray t-shirt, work boots. But something was wrong with his proportions, like he'd been assembled by someone who understood human anatomy but had never actually seen a real person. The figure raised its hand in a stop gesture. Its mouth moved, and Marcus heard the voice through his closed windows, through the engine noise, directly in his head. "You are stuck in the fold. The road accepted you. You loop until you're processed." "Processed?" Marcus shouted. "What does that mean? How do I get out?" "You don't get out. The road that eats time consumes everything eventually. You'll notice soon. You're already starting to fade." Marcus looked down at his hands. His horror grew as he saw they were slightly transparent, like an underexposed photograph. He could see the steering wheel through his palms. "No," he whispered. "No, this isn't happening." The figure tilted its head at an impossible angle. 23 loops so far. Most people fade completely by loop 50. You'll become part of the road then, part of Eureka, one of us. It's not painful. You simply stop being separate from the place. Marcus stomped on the accelerator, the truck leaping forward. The figure made no attempt to move and vanished as the truck passed through the space where it had stood. No impact, no resistance. Just there and then gone. His mind raced for solutions. The loops began outside Eureka and ended when he entered it. Maybe if he could get through the town instead of just passing its outskirts. He'd been looping around it but never tried driving straight through the center. On Loop 24, Marcus took the main exit into town. The street was eerily perfect. Sidewalks, storefronts, parked cars, all present but frozen like a photograph. The people thing stood on corners, all turning their heads in unison to watch him pass. He drove straight through, following the road as it curved through the small downtown and back toward the highway. His truck emerged from town onto Route 50, heading west. His GPS flickered, jumped, and suddenly showed him 300 miles west of Eureka, approaching Reno. His odometer spun forward rapidly, adding 300 miles in 3 seconds. His fuel gauge dropped to 1/4 tank. The dashboard clock read 5:12 a.m., exactly the time he should have arrived at this location if he'd been driving normally. The missing hours, the loops, the fading, it all snapped back into linear time like a rubber band released. Marcus pulled over at the next rest stop and sat, shaking for 20 minutes. He checked his phone. His GPS history showed him traveling normally along Highway 50 with no stops or loops, but his notepad had the count, 24 tallies, 24 passages through Eureka. He completed his delivery to Sacramento, then called in sick for 3 weeks. During that time, he researched Highway 50, focusing on Eureka. He found scattered reports online, tucked away in obscure forums and conspiracy sites. Other drivers who'd experienced loops, missing time, encounters with the wrong proportioned people. None of the reports were recent. The newest was from 2015. Most people who posted never posted again. Marcus Washington still drives trucks, but he refuses any route that touches Highway 50 in Nevada. He took a significant pay cut to eliminate those runs from his rotation. Sometimes, when he's driving other desert highways at night, he'll see a road sign flash by that he swears says, "Eureka, next exit," even though he's nowhere near Nevada. On those nights, he drives faster and doesn't look back. And when he does look at his hands while driving just for a moment, he can still see them. The faint traces of transparency that never completely went away. A reminder that part of him is still looping through that impossible town, counting passages until he fades completely. Story 4. The Hitchhiker Who Wouldn't Leave. Patricia Chen had 3 hard rules for her 26 years of driving. Never speed through construction zones, always pre-trip inspect her vehicle, and absolutely never pick up hitchhikers. The third rule had served her well through countless miles across the Pacific Northwest, keeping her safe and on schedule. But on a rainy November night in 2018, somewhere on Washington State Route 101 along the coast, that rule got broken in a way that defied every law of physics and sanity Patricia understood. The storm had rolled in from the Pacific around 8 p.m., turning her windshield into a waterfall despite the wipers running at full speed. Patricia was hauling timber from Port Angeles to Portland, a routine run she'd made hundreds of times. The coastal highway was treacherous in good weather, and the storm made it genuinely dangerous. Hairpin turns with sheer drops to the ocean below, visibility reduced to maybe 50 feet, wind buffeting her trailer hard enough to feel it trying to push her across the lanes. She just navigated a particularly nasty curve when her headlights caught a figure standing on the shoulder ahead. A woman in a light-colored dress, no jacket, no umbrella, completely soaked by the rain. She wasn't holding out her thumb or making any gesture, just standing there, facing the oncoming traffic, perfectly still despite the wind and rain. Patricia's first instinct was to call it in to the state patrol. Nobody should be out in this weather, especially not dressed like that. She grabbed her CB radio as she passed, catching a brief glimpse of the woman's face in her side mirror. Pale, expressionless eyes that seemed to reflect the truck's taillights with an odd luminescence. "Breaker, breaker, this is Timber Queen on 101 southbound, mile marker 254. Got a woman stranded on the shoulder in this storm. Looks like she needs assistance." Patricia waited for a response while watching her mirrors. The woman was gone, just vanished. Patricia's mirrors showed empty road behind her. Rain-slicked asphalt reflecting her taillights, but no person. She must have moved into the trees, Patricia reasoned, maybe seeking shelter. The CB crackled with a state patrol response confirming they'd check it out. 2 miles later, the woman was in Patricia's passenger seat. Patricia's scream died in her throat as her hands instinctively jerked the wheel, nearly sending the truck off the road before she recovered. The woman sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap. That same expressionless face now turned toward Patricia. She was impossibly present, solidly real, but Patricia had not stopped. Her doors were locked. The truck had been empty 30 seconds ago. "Get out!" Patricia shouted, her voice shrill with terror. "Get out of my truck!" The woman didn't move or speak. Water dripped from her hair and dress, pooling on the seat, but she seemed unbothered by the cold. Her dress was white, or had been once. Now it was dingy and stained, the style old-fashioned, like something from the 1950s. Up close, her skin had a waxy quality, and those eyes, they were wrong. Too large, too dark. Pupils dilated so wide there was almost no iris visible. Patricia grabbed her phone, but it was dead despite being fully charged moments ago. The CB radio produced only static. Her dashboard lights flickered, and the temperature in the cab dropped so rapidly that her breath became visible. The woman turned her head slowly, mechanically, like a doll's head rotating on a post, and looked directly at Patricia. "You saw me," the woman said, her voice flat and hollow. "You acknowledged me. Now I ride with you." "Like hell you do!" Patricia's hand shot to the passenger door handle and yanked it open. Wind and rain exploded into the cab, but the woman didn't budge. Patricia grabbed the woman's arm to push her out, and her hand passed through the woman's flesh like it was smoke. Solid enough to sit and leave puddles, but incorporeal when Patricia tried to touch her with intent to remove her. Patricia slammed the door shut and pressed herself against the driver's side, as far from the hitchhiker as possible. Her training kicked in. Keep driving, get to somewhere with people, deal with the impossible later. The next town was Forks, maybe 20 miles ahead. She pressed the accelerator, pushing her truck faster than was safe in the storm. The woman watched her drive, just watched, unblinking, head tilted slightly, that expression of absolutely nothing on her face. 5 minutes passed. 10. Patricia's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst. The woman's presence was suffocating, wrong in a way that made Patricia's primitive brain scream danger. "What do you want?" Patricia finally asked, her voice barely steady. "To ride," the woman answered. "Everyone who sees me gives me a ride. Some drive for hours, some for days. One man drove for 3 weeks before his heart gave out. You saw me. Now you drive until I decide to leave." Patricia's blood went cold. "The hell I will. I'll crash this truck if I have to." "You won't." The woman's voice held certainty. "The ones who try to crash find they can't. The truck drives itself. You're not in control anymore. I am." Patricia tested it immediately, jerking the wheel hard to the right. The wheel moved, but the truck didn't respond. It stayed perfectly centered in its lane, maintaining speed as if her input meant nothing. She slammed on the brakes, the pedal went to the floor with no resistance, and the truck kept rolling at exactly 45 miles per hour. Panic truly set in then. Patricia screamed, yanking on the wheel, stomping pedals, reaching for the emergency brake. Nothing worked. The truck had become autonomous, driving itself through the storm with mechanical precision. And worse, she couldn't open her door. The handle moved, the latch clicked, but the door wouldn't budge, as if welded shut. "You're trapped," the woman confirmed unnecessarily. "You drive until I'm satisfied. Some satisfy me quickly. Others take longer. It depends on how interesting you are." Patricia forced herself to breathe slowly, to think. She'd heard stories, old trucker legends about phantom hitchhikers, but she'd always dismissed them as campfire tales. This was real. The woman was real in some horrible way. The cold radiating from her was real. The loss of control was definitely real. "How long?" Patricia asked. "And how long do I have to drive?" "Until dawn, perhaps. Or until you bore me. Tell me stories, entertain me. Make me feel something other than this emptiness. That's what I need. To feel through you, to experience life through your fear and your stories and your desperate attempts to survive this night." Patricia's mind raced. If she had to keep this thing entertained until dawn, she would. The sun rose around 7 a.m. this time of year. She could last 9 more hours if it meant surviving. She started talking, telling the woman about her life, her family, her years on the road. The woman listened, unmoving, and sometimes Patricia would see the faintest flicker of something in those two large eyes. Not emotion exactly, but awareness. Hunger. Hours blurred together. The truck drove itself through the storm, making every turn perfectly, maintaining speed, never deviating. Patricia talked until her voice was hoarse. She told every story she could remember, dredged up childhood memories, described her daughter's wedding in exhaustive detail, recounted funny moments and tragic ones and everything in between. The woman absorbed it all silently. Occasionally she would ask questions in that flat voice. What did fear feel like in that moment? Or describe the happiness more specifically. And Patricia would comply, instinctively understanding that stopping meant something worse than just having this thing in her cab. Around 4 a.m., the woman smiled for the first time. It was a horrible expression, too wide, showing too many teeth that were too white and too sharp. "You're interesting," she said. "More interesting than most. The man who drove for 3 weeks, he was boring. He cried and begged and told me nothing useful. You tell me stories, you try to understand me, that's rare." "So you'll leave?" Patricia asked hopefully. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I'll keep you longer, I haven't decided." The storm began to break around 5:30 a.m., the rain lessening to a drizzle. The sky lightened incrementally in the east, that deep blue that comes before dawn. The woman turned to look at the approaching sunrise, and Patricia saw something like fear or pain cross that inhuman face. "Dawn," the woman whispered. "I hate dawn. It means I have to go back." "Back where?" Patricia asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "To the place I died, to the shoulder of the road where I've stood for 63 years, waiting for someone to see me, to acknowledge I existed. You saw me, Patricia Chen. You called for help for me. That kindness bound you to me, and your stories have sustained me more than most." The sun's first rays touched the horizon. The woman began to fade, becoming translucent, and Patricia could see the passenger seat through her body. "I'll return the courtesy," the woman said, her voice becoming distant. "I'll let you keep your life. But remember me, Patricia. Remember that not everyone standing on the roadside is among the living, and sometimes the kindest act is to drive past without looking." The woman vanished completely as sunlight filled the cab. Control of the truck returned instantly. Patricia felt the weight of the steering wheel come back under her hands, felt her foot on the accelerator actually mean something again. She immediately pulled over, shaking so badly she could barely put the transmission in park. Her passenger seat was soaked, water pooled where the woman had sat. Patricia touched it, ice cold. Her phone powered back on, showing 6:47 a.m. and dozens of missed calls from her dispatcher. Worried because she'd gone completely dark for hours. Patricia called in, made excuses about radio failure and dead zones. She completed her delivery to Portland in a daze, then drove home and took a week off. She researched Route 101's history and found it. A young woman named Elizabeth Marsh killed in 1955 in a car accident near mile marker 254, body not found for 3 days. Photos showed the same woman, the same dress, the same face Patricia had seen. Patricia Chen still drives, but she's broken her rule about hitchhikers exactly once, and once was enough. She travels Route 101 only during daylight now, and even then she doesn't look at the shoulder too carefully around mile marker 254. Sometimes, late at night on other roads, she'll see figures standing in the darkness, and her first instinct is still to call for help. But she catches herself now, forces herself to look away, drives past without acknowledgement. Because she knows now some people standing on the roadside are waiting for more than just a ride. They're waiting for acknowledgement, for someone to see them and bind themselves to something that should have stayed unseen. And Patricia Chen has no intention of entertaining another passenger like that for 9 hours of horror while the sun decides whether she lives or dies. Story 5. The facility that shouldn't exist. Robert Bob Henderson had delivered to military installations, government research facilities, and secure corporate compounds throughout his 40-year career. So when his dispatch assigned him a priority run to a classified location in rural Montana, he barely blinked. The coordinates led to somewhere in the mountains northeast of Helena. The cargo was sealed and tagged with Department of Defense labels, and the pay was excellent. Bob had handled similar runs dozens of times. He had no reason to think this delivery would be the one that would make him question reality itself. The date was September 15, 2017. Bob left the distribution center in Billings at 5 a.m. with his cargo, 3 large crates loaded onto his flatbed, covered with tarps and secured with DoD-approved seals he was forbidden to break. His route took him west on I-90, then north on increasingly rural highways as he climbed into the mountains. The facility coordinates weren't in any GPS database, so he'd been provided with turn-by-turn directions on a printed sheet that self-destructed, actually dissolved, 30 minutes after being exposed to air, a feature that impressed and unnerved him. By 2 p.m., Bob was deep in national forest land, following a barely maintained dirt road that snaked through dense pine forest. He hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour. His odometer showed he'd driven 73 miles since leaving the main highway, though the printed directions indicated his destination was only 42 miles from that junction. The discrepancy bothered him, but mountain roads were deceptive, winding back on themselves. Then he saw the fence. It appeared suddenly, cutting through the forest like a razor, 20 feet tall, chain-link topped with razor wire, extending in both directions until it disappeared into the trees. No signs, no markings, just the fence and a gate that looked like it belonged at a prison. Bob checked his directions. This was the place. He pulled up to the gate and waited. Nothing happened. No guard shack, no intercom, no cameras visible. Bob honked his horn. The sound echoed off the surrounding mountains and died in the thick forest. He tried his CB radio, then his cell phone. No signal on either. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then the gate simply opened, sliding silently on tracks despite looking old and rusted. No one appeared to operate it. Bob hesitated, every instinct telling him this was wrong, but he'd been paid half up front with the remainder on delivery confirmation. He needed this job. He pulled through the gate. The road beyond descended sharply into a valley Bob could have sworn wasn't there when he'd approached. The forest gave way to scrubland, then to bare earth, then to something that looked like it had been scoured down to bedrock. Buildings appeared. Low concrete structures that looked decades old, windows dark, no vehicles anywhere. It looked less like an active facility and more like an abandoned Cold War installation. Bob followed the road to what appeared to be the main loading area, a concrete pad with a corrugated metal building beside it. As he parked and set his air brakes, a man appeared from the building. He wore an old-style uniform, olive drab, no insignia, and his face had that ageless quality that could have been 30 or 60. He walked with stiff mechanical movements. "You're late," the man said, his voice flat. "Delivery was expected at 1400 hours. It's now 1417. Bob checked his watch. It read 2:17 p.m. "My watch says different, buddy, and I drove straight here, no stops." "Time runs differently here," the man said, and something about the way he said it suggested it wasn't a figure of speech. "Unload the cargo at Bay 3. He pointed to a roll-up door on the building. Bob had loaded and unloaded cargo thousands of times. This should have been routine. Back up to the bay, use the dock equipment to transfer the crates, get a signature, and leave. But as he maneuvered his truck into position, he noticed something that made his skin crawl. There were other trucks parked around the facility, old ones, really old, ranging from 1950s-era vehicles to models from the 1980s. They weren't rusted or damaged. They looked like they'd been parked yesterday, but the styles were all wrong, all ancient. The bay door rolled up as he approached, revealing a dark interior. The uniformed man gestured for Bob to proceed. "Back in, we'll unload. You'll wait in the driver's lounge." He pointed to a door marked with faded paint. Bob's instincts screamed at him not to go inside that building, but refusing a military delivery was a career-ending move, possibly worse if the cargo was as classified as the paperwork suggested. He backed his trailer up to the dock, set his brakes, and climbed down from the cab. The uniformed man was gone, but two others had appeared, also in mismatched old uniforms, also moving with that same mechanical stiffness. The driver's lounge was exactly what Bob expected, and nothing like it simultaneously. It had the standard features: worn furniture, a coffee pot, a TV mounted in the corner, magazines on a table. But the TV was a 1970s model with wood paneling and dials. The magazines were from the 1960s, pages yellowed but not crumbling. The coffee pot was the old percolator style Bob's grandmother had used. And there were other drivers there. 3 men sitting in chairs, all wearing styles of clothing from different decades. "New guy," one of them said, looking up. He wore bell-bottom jeans and a shirt with a wide collar, pure 1970s. "What year did you drive in from?" Bob laughed nervously. "What kind of question is that? Today, 2017. The 3 drivers looked at each other with expressions Bob couldn't read. "Sure, buddy," the 1970s guy said. "We all drove in today. Have a seat. They'll call you when they're done with your truck." Bob sat, mostly because his legs felt unreliable. The TV was on, showing what looked like a news broadcast, but the graphics were wrong. The anchors dressed in styles from different eras, and the news itself made no sense, reporting on events Bob remembered from decades ago as if they were current. "First time here?" asked another driver, this one dressed like he'd stepped out of the 1950s. Crisp shirt, thin tie, hair slicked back. "Yeah." "How long does unloading usually take?" "For us, we've been waiting 6 hours, 3 days, and 40 years respectively." The 1950s driver said it matter-of-factly, like it was normal. "Time doesn't work right in this place. It's a facility built on a weak point. Somewhere reality got thin. They do experiments here, test things that shouldn't exist. And sometimes the deliveries get stuck. We keep waiting for them to finish unloading, but the wait just stretches on." Bob stood up fast. "That's insane. I'm leaving." "Door's locked," the third driver said, speaking for the first time. He was dressed in 1980s fashion, members-only jacket, high-waisted jeans. "We've all tried. You can't leave until they release you. Could be minutes, could be decades. This place exists outside normal time. It's always today here, but today never ends." Bob tried the door. Locked solid. He pounded on it, shouted, tried to break the small window. Nothing worked. The room was sealed. He pulled out his phone. No signal. and the date displayed was flickering between different years, cycling rapidly through decades. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Bob's watch had stopped making sense, the hands spinning backward and forward randomly. He tried talking to the other drivers, getting their stories. They'd all delivered classified cargo to this facility and gotten stuck in this waiting room. The 1950s driver claimed he'd been there for, subjectively, about 5 months. But who knows how long in the real world? The others had similar stories, trapped in a place where time had no meaning, waiting for clearance to leave that never came. Bob explored every inch of the room looking for another way out. Behind a filing cabinet, he found scratched messages on the wall, names and dates going back to 1947, dozens of drivers who'd apparently been stuck here. Some messages were desperate, others resigned. One made Bob's blood run cold. "It's been 3 hours here, but my wife is dead of old age when I call home. Don't let them keep you." He tried the coffee pot. It worked, producing fresh coffee despite clearly being decades old. The magazines, when he looked closely, had articles that shifted and changed. When he wasn't looking directly at them, text rearranging itself. Photos showing different scenes. The TV broadcast cycled through news from different eras, never staying in one decade for long. Then Bob heard his truck's engine start. He ran to the window, small and grimy, but offering a view of the loading bay. His truck was moving, pulling away from the dock with no driver visible in the cab. It drove itself across the facility toward the exit gate. "They do that sometimes," the 1970s driver said behind him. "Take the truck, but keep the driver. You won't see that rig again, at least not the same one. Sometimes a truck comes back, but it's different, older or newer, wrong somehow." Bob hammered on the window, screaming, watching his livelihood drive away on its own. Then a voice crackled from an intercom speaker he hadn't noticed before. "Driver Henderson, unloading complete. You may depart. Your truck is waiting at the front gate." The door clicked unlocked. Bob didn't wait. He ran, sprinting across the facility toward the gate. His truck was there, idling, looking exactly as it should. He jumped in, expecting differences, but everything was normal. Same air freshener hanging from the mirror, same logbook on the passenger seat, same coffee stain on the dashboard. The gate was already open. Bob didn't question it, just drove through and kept driving, pushing his rig faster than was safe on the twisting mountain road. He drove for 2 hours before reaching the main highway. Then another hour before pulling into a truck stop where other vehicles, normal people, and working cell phones confirmed he was back in the real world. His phone showed 6:43 p.m. September 15th, 2017. He'd been at the facility for 4.5 hours. But his logbook told a different story. It showed entries he didn't remember making, covering 3 full days of driving, arriving at the facility on September 12th and leaving on the 15th. 3 days compressed into 4.5 hours, or 4.5 hours stretched into 3 days. Bob couldn't tell which. He called his dispatcher, reported delivery complete. They confirmed receipt and said his payment had been processed 3 days ago. When Bob protested that he'd just delivered today, the dispatcher pulled up GPS data showing Bob's truck had been at the facility for 72 hours before leaving. Bob Henderson retired 6 months later, at 62, earlier than he'd planned. He sold his truck and took a job as a warehouse supervisor where he never had to make long-distance deliveries again. He never told anyone the full story, just said he was done with the road. But sometimes he thinks about those other drivers, still sitting in that lounge watching TV from decades that aren't quite right, waiting for permission to leave that might never come. He wonders how long they'll wait before they realize time has forgotten them completely, before they understand that in a facility that exists outside normal reality, waiting might last forever. And he's grateful that whatever mechanism governs that place decided to let him go after only 3 days, or 4 hours, or whatever the hell it actually was. Story 6. The Convoy of the Damned. Terrence Shaw had been hauling freight on I-70 through Kansas for 19 years, and he'd seen every kind of trucker the road had to offer. Professionals, cowboys, rookies, and everything in between. But on the foggy morning of April 3, 2019, somewhere between Salina and Hayes, Terrence encountered a convoy that defied explanation and left him questioning whether some roads are traveled by more than just the living. He'd left Denver the previous evening hauling auto parts to Kansas City, running his usual overnight schedule to avoid traffic. By 4 a.m., he was deep in Kansas, that empty stretch where the highway is straight as a ruler for miles and the only company is other long-haul truckers and the occasional insomniac in a passenger car. The spring fog had rolled in thick, reducing visibility to maybe 100 yards, his headlights reflecting off the moisture in the air like trying to see through milk. That's when he first spotted the convoy ahead. A line of semi-trucks, 6 of them, running close together in the right lane. Too close, actually, maybe 30 feet between each trailer, which was dangerous in good visibility and insane in this fog. Terrence eased off his speed, letting distance open up between him and the last truck. He'd seen enough accidents caused by tight formations. One brake check and you had a chain reaction pileup. Something about the convoy bothered him immediately. The trucks were old. Not vintage old, but maintained, but genuinely ancient styles from the 1960s and 70s that should have been in museums or scrapyards. But they weren't rusted or falling apart. They looked pristine, paint jobs fresh, chrome gleaming in his headlights. And they were all running without lights. No taillights, no clearance lights, nothing. Just dark shapes moving through the fog. Terrence grabbed his CB radio. Breaker, breaker, this is Mile High on I-70 eastbound. Mile marker 216, got a convoy ahead running dark, no taillights. You guys aware that's illegal and dangerous as hell? Static answered him, but underneath it he heard something else. Voices, multiple overlapping conversations in that static, speaking too quickly to make out words. Then a voice cut through clearly, male and rough. Mile High, this is Phantom Leader. Maintain distance. Do not attempt to pass. Do not make contact. This is your only warning. Terrence's hands tightened on the wheel. The voice had an edge to it, something cold and dead that made his instincts scream danger. Phantom Leader, you need to pull over and fix your lights before you cause an accident. We had our accident, the voice replied. 26 years ago, now we drive forever. Maintain distance. The radio went silent. Terrence tried calling again, then tried switching channels. Nothing but that static with voices underneath. He considered his options. The smart move was to take the next exit and let these lunatics get ahead of him. But the fog was getting worse, and the exits out here were few and far between, often leading to nothing but empty ranch roads. The convoy maintained its speed, exactly 63 miles per hour, never varying. Terrence matched it, keeping about a quarter-mile back, watching those dark shapes move through the fog like ghosts. Then he noticed something that made his stomach drop. The road was perfectly straight here, visibility poor but not zero. He should have been able to see oncoming headlights from miles away. But there was nothing. No eastbound traffic, no westbound traffic, nothing but him and the convoy. The highway had become empty of all other life. At 4:37 a.m., Terrence tried to pass. He'd had enough of following these idiots, fog or no fog. He pulled into the left lane and accelerated, his speedometer climbing to 70, then 75. The convoy stayed ahead of him, matching his speed exactly despite his clear acceleration. He pushed to 80, the fastest he dared in these conditions. The convoy remained the same distance ahead, as if connected to his truck by an invisible tether. Then the convoy trucks all turned on their headlights simultaneously, and Terrence saw what was in front of them. A massive pileup, dozens of vehicles twisted and burning, blocking all lanes of the highway. The scene was impossibly clear despite the fog, every detail sharp. Cars crushed under trailer weight, fuel burning in pools across the asphalt, and bodies, so many bodies scattered among the wreckage. Terrence slammed on his brakes, his trailer beginning to jackknife as he fought for control. The convoy drove straight into the pileup without slowing, the lead truck disappearing into the flames. Then the second truck, the third, all of them driving into the inferno like it wasn't there. And as the last truck passed through the burning wreckage, everything vanished. The pileup, the fires, the bodies, all of it gone like it had never existed. The highway ahead was clear and empty. Terrence sat in his stopped truck in the middle of I-70, breathing hard, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the wheel. The convoy was gone, vanished into the fog ahead. He checked his mirrors compulsively, expecting what? He didn't know, but the empty highway felt threatening in a way he'd never experienced before. His CB radio crackled to life. "Mile High, this is Phantom Leader. You saw our end. April 3rd, 1993, 26 years ago today. Fog just like this, 6 trucks running convoy hit a pileup caused by a drunk driver. Killed all 6 drivers, 12 people total. Now we drive the same route every year on the anniversary. We run it forever, hitting the same pileup over and over, dying the same way every dawn." "That's impossible," Terrence whispered. "You can't be. You're dead." "We're aware. Doesn't change anything. We drive because we can't stop. The road won't let us, and we try to warn others, those who can see us. You saw us, Mile High. That means you're sensitive to it. The thin places where the dead and living roads overlap. You'll see others now. The night road is more crowded than you think." Terrence put his truck in gear and started driving again, slowly, his high beams cutting through the fog. "Why warn me? What am I supposed to do with this?" "Drive carefully. Every mile marker is a grave somewhere. Every stretch of highway has seen death. Most pass through unaware. But you'll see them now. The accident victims still reliving their final moments. The drivers who never completed their routes. All of us stuck on an endless repeat. Just don't join us, that's all we ask. Don't become another ghost on this highway." The radio went silent again, this time completely, not even static. Terrence drove on, his mind reeling. As dawn began to break around 6 a.m., burning off the fog, he started seeing them. Trucks on the shoulder that disappeared when he got close. Drivers standing next to vehicles waving for help, then vanishing. Accident scenes that lasted only seconds before fading like they'd been projected onto the fog. At mile marker 219, he saw the convoy one last time. They were parked on the shoulder, all 6 trucks in a line. The drivers stood beside their cabs, watching Terrence pass. He could see them clearly in the growing daylight, ordinary men in ordinary clothes, but faded, transparent in the dawn light. They saluted him, a gesture of respect between fellow drivers, and then they were gone, trucks and all, vanishing as the sun broke fully over the horizon. Terrence pulled into the next truck stop and sat in the parking lot for 2 hours, drinking coffee and trying to process what he'd experienced. He researched on his phone and found it. News articles from April 3rd, 1993 about a massive pileup on I-70 in Kansas, heavy fog, 6 semi-trucks, 12 fatalities. The articles listed the drivers' names, showed photos of the wreckage, described the horror of the scene. He called his dispatcher and took a week off, claiming family emergency. During that week, Terrence barely slept. When he did, he dreamed of fog and burning trucks and drivers saluting as they faded into dawn. He considered quitting, finding a different career where highways and night driving weren't involved. But he didn't quit. Terrence Shaw still drives I-70, still makes the Denver to Kansas City run. But he's different now. He pays attention to things other drivers miss. The shimmer of impossible vehicles in the distance, The CB radio voices that come through when no one should be transmitting. The cold spots on certain stretches of highway where he can see his breath even in summer. And every April 3rd he calls in sick or takes a different route. He won't drive I-70 through Kansas on that date. Won't risk encountering the convoy again. Because Phantom Leader was right. Terrence sees them now, all the ghosts of the highway, the accidents and tragedies imprinted on the asphalt like scars, and he has no intention of joining their ranks, of becoming another phantom driver running an eternal route through fog that never lifts, reliving death over and over while trying to warn the living to drive carefully and make it home alive. Story 7. The Living Trailer. Dominic Russo had hauled every kind of cargo imaginable in his 34 years as an independent contractor. Livestock, chemicals, precious metals, you name it. But the job he took on December 12, 2016, was his first experience with what the paperwork euphemistically called experimental biological materials. And it would be his last. What started as a high-paying specialty haul from a pharmaceutical company outside Tucson, Arizona, ended with Dominic abandoning his trailer on a desert highway and refusing to ever discuss the details with anyone but his priest and his therapist. The offer came through a private broker, not his usual channels. The pay was exceptional, $15,000 for a relatively short haul from Tucson to a facility in Los Alamos, New Mexico. The cargo had already been loaded and sealed by the time Dominic arrived to pick up the trailer at 6 p.m. It was a standard 53-foot refrigerated unit, temperature set at exactly 2 degrees Celsius, with biohazard placards and strict instructions. Maintain temperature precisely, do not open trailer for any reason, deliver within 18 hours, avoid populated areas when possible. Dominic performed his standard pre-trip inspection. The trailer was newer, well-maintained refrigeration unit running smoothly. Nothing seemed off except for one detail that struck him as odd. The interior walls had been reinforced with what looked like steel plates, visible through the small inspection window on the trailer doors. That was unusual for a reefer unit, but pharmaceutical companies were paranoid about cargo security. He shrugged it off, connected his truck, and headed out. The first 3 hours were uneventful. Dominic took Route 70 east out of Arizona into New Mexico, the desert landscape dark and empty under a moonless sky. His cab was comfortable, radio playing classic rock, thermos of coffee in the cup holder. Just another night drive. Then at 9:23 p.m., according to his dashboard clock, he heard the first impact. A heavy thud from inside the trailer, loud enough to feel through the fifth wheel connection. Dominic's first thought was that something had come loose in the cargo area. He checked his monitoring system, temperature stable, no alerts, trailer structurally sound. Another thud, this one harder, followed by a sound like dragging or sliding. Dominic grabbed his CB. Breaker, breaker, anyone familiar with hauling biological materials? I'm getting some movement back in my trailer. Want to make sure this is normal before I stop to check it out. A response came quickly, a woman's voice. What kind of biological? Livestock or research? Research, I think. Pharmaceutical company shipment. Long pause. If it's moving, don't stop. Don't open that trailer. Whatever they loaded, if it's active, you just drive and deliver. Opening the trailer voids the contract and possibly violates federal law. How much they paying you? 15 grand. Yeah, that's hazard pay. Keep driving, friend. Whatever's back there, they paid you to not ask questions. The radio fell silent. Dominic's hands were sweating on the wheel. Another series of thuds came from the trailer, a rhythmic pattern. Thump, thump, drag, thump, thump, drag. It sounded like something large moving around back there, deliberately, not just shifting cargo. The trailer rocked slightly with each impact. At 10:15 p.m., the temperature alarm blared. The trailer had warmed to 5 degrees. Dominic immediately adjusted the refrigeration to maximum, but the temperature continued to climb. 6 degrees, 7, 8. He could hear the compressor working overtime, but something was generating heat inside that trailer, overwhelming the cooling system. Then he heard the sound that made his blood freeze. Breathing. Deep, wet, labored breathing that came through his cab's trailer monitoring speakers. Not human breathing. Too slow. Too deep. Each inhalation lasting 10 seconds. Each exhalation accompanied by a rattling sound like fluid in lungs. Dominic considered pulling over, unhitching the trailer, and calling his broker to deal with whatever nightmare was back there. But he was in the middle of the desert, miles from anything, and the contract had been explicit about not stopping. He pressed on, pushing his speed to 75 miles per hour. The breathing grew louder. The thuds became more frequent and violent, the entire trailer shaking with impacts that sounded like something ramming the walls from inside. Dominic could see the trailer flexing in his mirrors, the steel-reinforced walls bulging outward with each hit. Whatever was inside was immensely strong and getting agitated. At 11:47 p.m. something changed. The violent impacts stopped. The breathing slowed to a normal rhythm. The temperature stabilized at 12 degrees, warmer than specified, but no longer climbing. For 5 minutes, everything was quiet except for the road noise in his engine. Then Dominic heard scratching. Not random scratching, deliberate, purposeful. It was coming from the front wall of the trailer, the barrier between the cargo area and his cab. Something was scratching at the metal, and with each scratch, Dominic heard the shriek of claws on steel. He glanced at his side mirror and saw something that nearly made him swerve off the road. The inspection window on the trailer doors, the small reinforced glass panel, was glowing with a pale green bioluminescence, and in that glow he could see movement, shadows of something large pressing against the glass from inside. The scratching intensified. Dominic heard metal tearing, actually tearing, and when he looked at the front wall of his trailer through the cab's rear window, he saw claws punching through. 4 parallel gouges appeared in the steel barrier, moonlight visible through the tears. Whatever was inside was breaking out. Dominic grabbed his phone and called the emergency number on his contract. It rang 6 times before a calm, clinical voice answered. Incident response. My cargo is breaking out of the trailer, Dominic shouted. I need immediate assistance on Route 70 eastbound, mile marker 114. Remain calm. Is the specimen loose in the cab? Specimen? No, it's still in the trailer, but it's tearing through. Then continue driving. Do not stop. The restraint system will reactivate shortly. This is expected behavior during transport. Expected? This thing is ripping through steel walls. Driver Russo, the trailer is designed to contain the specimen. Minor breaches are within tolerance. You will receive a bonus for dealing with elevated activity. Just drive. We'll meet you at the delivery point. The call disconnected. Dominic stared at his phone in disbelief, then at his mirrors where he could see the trailer continuing to flex and bulge. The breathing had become aggressive, almost growling, and the bioluminescent glow from the inspection window was brightening, casting eerie green light across the desert. Then he smelled it, a chemical organic stench that seeped into his cab despite all the seals. It smelled like formaldehyde mixed with rotting meat and something else, something he had no reference for, a smell that made his primitive hindbrain scream predator. His eyes watered, his stomach churned. The smell was so intense he could taste it. More claws punched through the barrier wall. Dominic could see them clearly now in his rearview camera feed, glossy black, curved like scythes, attached to something pale and segmented. They flexed and reached, and the tearing sounds continued as the thing worked to expand the holes. Dominic made a decision. He activated his hazard lights and began slowing down, looking for a place to pull over, He was going to unhitch this trailer and walk away. Contract be damned. No amount of money was worth whatever was about to break into his cab. But as his speed dropped below 60 miles per hour, the trailer erupted in violence. The thing inside began slamming against the walls with such force that Dominic felt his truck being pushed forward. The entire trailer rocked side to side, and he heard something crack, one of the wall panels splitting completely. The scratching became frantic, the breathing turned into shrieking, a sound so alien and terrible that Dominic's hands moved on their own, accelerating back to 75 miles per hour. The violence stopped instantly. The moment he passed 70 miles per hour, the specimen calmed down. The breathing returned to that slow, deep rhythm. The scratching ceased. It was like a switch had been flipped. Dominic understood. The thing was trained or conditioned somehow. Fast movement kept it docile. Slowing down triggered aggression. They'd set him up to have no choice but to keep driving at speed no matter what happened. For the next 6 hours, Dominic drove in a state of exhausted terror. He didn't dare slow down, even when his bladder screamed for relief, even when fatigue made his eyes burn. He monitored the trailer constantly, watching those clawed appendages occasionally probe through the holes in the barrier wall, seeing the green glow pulse and fade, smelling that horrible chemical stench that never quite dissipated. Dawn broke around 6 a.m. The desert landscape became visible, beautiful, and indifferent to his nightmare. The facility coordinates indicated he was close, maybe 15 miles out. The specimen had quieted, the breathing barely audible. Dominic allowed himself to hope he'd make it. The facility appeared, another anonymous concrete compound with security fencing. Guards in full hazmat suits were waiting at the gate. They directed him to a specialized loading bay that looked like an airlock. Before he'd even set his parking brake, they were disconnecting his trailer with practiced efficiency. "Out of the cab now," one of them ordered through a speaker. "Leave your belongings. You'll be decontaminated and debriefed." Dominic climbed down on shaking legs. They hustled him into a decontamination shower, had him strip and scrub with chemical solutions that burned his skin. Through a window, he could see his trailer being moved into a containment building. For just a moment before the building doors closed, he saw them open the trailer. Something massive and pale lunged out, and the hazmat team hit it with what looked like electrical prods, driving it deeper into the facility. The debrief lasted 4 hours. They made him sign documents, non-disclosure, agreements with terrifying penalty clauses, liability waivers, medical release forms. The bonus they'd promised was real. An additional $20,000 appeared in his account. They gave him new clothes, drove him to a rental car place in Los Alamos, and told him his truck would be delivered to his home address after sterilization procedures. Dominic Russo received his truck 3 weeks later. It had been thoroughly cleaned, every surface sterilized, the trailer connection points replaced entirely. But he could never bring himself to use it for another long-haul job. He sold it 6 months later and took a job doing local deliveries, where the cargo was furniture and appliances and normal things that didn't breathe or break through steel walls. He still has nightmares about that drive, the scratching sounds, the bioluminescent glow, those black claws punching through metal. And sometimes, when he's driving at night and passes a refrigerated trailer on the highway, he wonders what's really inside, whether his cargo was unique or if there are other drivers out there hauling living nightmares across dark roads, bound by contracts and hazard pay to never speak about the things that scratch at the walls and shriek when you slow down. Story 8. The Repeating Mile. Margaret Maggie Sullivan had been driving for 38 years, long enough to have seen the trucking industry transform from CB radios and paper logs to satellite tracking and electronic everything. At 63, she was one of the old guard, a woman who'd broken into a male-dominated profession in the 1980s and earned respect through sheer competence. She thought she'd experienced every oddity the road could offer. Then came the night of January 18th, 2021, when she got trapped in a single mile of highway that refused to end, and all her experience counted for nothing. Maggie was hauling furniture from Charlotte, North Carolina to Memphis, Tennessee, following I-40 west through the Appalachian foothills. The weather was cold but clear, traffic light on a Sunday night. Around 11:30 p.m., she was passing through a rural stretch of Tennessee, somewhere between Asheville and Knoxville, when she first noticed something odd about mile marker 447. The marker itself was unremarkable, a standard green sign with white numbers reflecting her headlights. What caught her attention was that she'd passed it before. Not earlier in her trip, she distinctly remembered passing it about 5 minutes prior. She'd noticed it specifically because the marker had been tilted at an odd angle, like it had been hit by a vehicle and never properly repaired. Maggie checked her GPS. It showed her moving steadily along I-40, progressing normally through the miles. But then she saw it again. Mile marker 447 tilted at that same angle. Impossible. She'd driven at a steady 65 miles per hour for 10 minutes. She should have been miles past this point. She slowed down, looking carefully at the landscape. The highway here ran through dense forest, trees pressing close to the road on both sides. There was a slight curve to the right, a section of guardrail on the left, and an emergency call box about halfway through the mile. All exactly as she remembered from 2 previous passes. Maggie's hands tightened on the wheel. She checked her odometer. It was advancing normally. Her fuel gauge showed the expected consumption. Every indicator said she was driving forward. But there was mile marker 447 again, now for the 4th time. She grabbed her CB radio. "Breaker, breaker, this is Carolina Queen on I-40 westbound near mile marker 447. Anyone else experiencing weird navigation issues in this area?" Static answered her. She tried her cell phone. No signal, which wasn't unusual in these mountains, but the timing felt ominous. Maggie decided to conduct a test. As she approached the mile marker for the 5th time, she opened her window and threw out an empty water bottle, watching it land on the shoulder. Then she drove on, counting in her head. If she was really looping, she'd see that bottle again. The landscape repeated. Trees, curve, guardrail, call box, and there on the shoulder ahead was her water bottle. Maggie's mouth went dry. She was stuck in a loop exactly 1 mile long, passing the same section of highway over and over despite continuously driving forward. She tried flooring the accelerator, pushing her rig to 80 miles per hour. The scenery blurred past, but when the minute and a half it should have taken to cover the mile was up, there was the marker again. She tried slowing to 30 miles per hour. 5 minutes of driving and the result was the same. The landscape repeated, the mile marker appeared, the loop continued. Maggie pulled over to the shoulder, the same shoulder where her water bottle sat, and put her hazards on. She climbed out of the cab thinking maybe the problem was her truck, maybe she could see something from outside that would explain this. The forest was silent except for the idle of her engine. No wind, no animal sounds, nothing. The silence felt wrong, too complete, like the world beyond her headlights didn't exist. She walked to the mile marker and examined it. Solid metal properly bolted to its post, real in every way. She walked 100 yards down the highway in both directions. The asphalt was normal, lines painted correctly, no visible anomalies. But the silence persisted, and the air had a strange quality, like being inside a photograph instead of a real place. Maggie got back in her truck and tried driving backward, putting a rig in reverse and backing along the shoulder. When she'd reversed far enough that she should have been out of the mile-long section, she stopped and drove forward again. Mile marker 447 appeared right on schedule. The loop had her completely. Hours passed. Maggie drove the same mile 47 times, trying variations, different speeds, different lanes, opening windows, honking the horn, anything to break the pattern. Nothing worked. The landscape repeated with perfect precision every time. Her fuel gauge should have been approaching empty, but it stayed frozen at 3/4 full. Her clock advanced normally. It was now 3:47 a.m. But the mile counter on her GPS refused to change. Then, on her 48th passage, something was different. There was another truck parked on the shoulder ahead, hazard lights flashing. Maggie slowed and pulled up behind it, hope surging. Another driver, another person experiencing the same phenomenon. Maybe together they could figure this out. The truck was old, a style from the late 1990s, and it looked abandoned. Maggie approached cautiously, calling out, but no one answered. The driver's door was open. Inside, the cab was empty but showed signs of recent occupation. A coffee cup in the holder, still containing liquid, a logbook open on the passenger seat. Maggie picked up the logbook and flipped to the last entry. The handwriting was shaky, increasingly erratic. Hour 14 in the loop, past marker 447 times, radio dead, phone dead, tried everything, can't get out. If someone reads this, I don't know if walking into the woods is escape or suicide, but I'm going to try. Can't drive the same mile forever, going insane. The date on the entry was November 3rd, 2019. Over a year ago. Maggie looked at the forest pressing against the highway, dark and absolutely still. That driver had walked into those woods and presumably never come back. Was his body out there somewhere? Or was he still wandering, trapped in a different kind of loop? Maggie returned to her own truck, the logbook clutched in her trembling hands. She wasn't going into those woods. She'd keep driving, keep looking for an exit from this nightmare. On her 53rd pass through the mile, she tried driving with her eyes closed just for a few seconds, thinking maybe the loop was psychological, something her brain was imposing. She opened her eyes just in time to see mile marker 447 approaching. Then she noticed the emergency call box. She'd passed it dozens of times, but she'd never stopped to try it. What could it hurt? On her next pass, she pulled over next to the call box and opened it. The phone inside looked ancient, probably hadn't been serviced in years. She picked up the receiver, expecting nothing. A voice answered immediately, calm and professional. "Emergency services, what is your location?" "I'm trapped on I-40 at mile marker 447, Maggie blurted. "I've been driving the same mile over and over for hours." "Mile marker 447, the voice interrupted. "Yes, we're aware of the anomaly. You're the second person this year. We apologize for the inconvenience." "Inconvenience? I'm trapped. How do I get out?" "The loop is a spatial distortion, cause unknown. It affects approximately 1 in every 10,000 vehicles that pass through this section. Most people don't notice. They pass through normally. But for those who become trapped, there's only one exit method that's worked reliably." "What is it? Tell me." "Stop looking for the mile marker. Stop watching for the landscape to repeat. Drive with your attention focused entirely on something else. Music, a podcast, a phone call if your signal works. The loop requires observation to maintain itself. If you stop observing it, stop expecting the repeat, sometimes it releases you." "That's insane. That's not how physics works." "No, it's not, but the loop doesn't follow standard physics. We've had 14 people trapped there over the past 30 years. 7 got out by following this advice. 7 disappeared, presumably by walking into the forest or driving until they lost their minds." "Your choice." The call disconnected. Maggie stood there, receiver in hand, processing the absurd advice. Stop observing? How could she not observe the road she was driving on? But what choice did she have? The alternative was continuing to loop until she went insane or ran out of supplies or simply gave up. She got back in her truck, took several deep breaths, and pulled up her favorite podcast on her phone. Miraculously, she still had downloaded episodes available offline. She put in her earbuds, turned the volume up, and started driving. She forced herself to listen to the podcast hosts discussing politics, to focus on their words, to not look at the scenery, to not watch for the mile marker. She stared straight ahead at the highway surface immediately in front of her truck, letting peripheral vision guide her lane position. Minutes passed. Maggie's heart pounded. Every instinct screamed at her to look, to check if she was still looping. She resisted, gripping the wheel, focusing on the podcast conversation that she wasn't really comprehending but was using as an anchor to keep her attention away from the landscape. Then her GPS spoke. "In 2 miles, take exit 446 toward Morristown." Maggie's eyes shot to the GPS screen. It showed her at mile marker 451, 4 miles past the loop. Behind her, according to the map, was mile marker 447, shrinking into the distance. She'd broken free. Maggie pulled off at the next exit and sat in a gas station parking lot, shaking so hard she could barely hold her coffee cup. The sky was lightening. Dawn was coming. She'd been trapped for over 4 hours. Her fuel gauge had unfrozen and showed nearly empty, like the truck had burned fuel for all those looping miles that the odometer hadn't counted. She never reported it officially. Who would believe her? Instead, she finished her delivery to Memphis, then drove straight home to Charlotte and took a month off. During that time, she researched everything she could find about mile marker 447 on I-40. She found scattered references in obscure forums, drivers reporting weird vibes around that area, a few claiming they'd passed the same landmark twice, one detailed account from 2007 that mirrored her experience almost exactly. Margaret Sullivan still drives trucks, though she's talking about retirement. But she never takes I-40 through that section of Tennessee anymore. She routes around it, adding hours to her trips because she knows that mile marker 447 is still there, still trapping the occasional vehicle in its impossible loop. And sometimes, late at night, she thinks about that driver from 2019 who walked into the woods rather than keep looping. She wonders if he found an exit or if he's still out there somewhere in the darkness between the trees, walking forever through a forest that repeats like the highway did, searching for a way out that might not exist. Story 9. The Voice in the Static. Leonard Jacoby had been a satellite radio subscriber since the technology became available, specifically because he hated commercials and loved having consistent music on long hauls. But during a 3-day run from Portland, Oregon to Houston, Texas in late October 2018, his satellite radio picked up a signal it shouldn't have been able to receive, and what he heard through that signal convinced him that some communication should never be intercepted. Leonard specialized in furniture transportation, running a small operation with 2 trucks. He was driving his newer Freightliner, equipped with all the modern conveniences including satellite radio, GPS, and a top-tier sound system. The route took him south through Oregon into California, then across the Southwest through Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico before arriving in Texas. The strangeness began on the second night, October 23rd, somewhere in central Nevada on Highway 95. It was 2:34 a.m. and Leonard was listening to his favorite classic rock station, cruising at 70 miles per hour through empty desert. The music cut out suddenly, replaced by static. Leonard frowned. Satellite radio wasn't supposed to have static. It either worked or it didn't. No interference, no fade-in, fade-out. He changed stations. Every preset produced the same static, that harsh white noise hiss. He scanned through all available channels, hundreds of them, music, talk, sports, news. Every single one was static. Frustrated, Leonard was about to switch to regular FM radio when he heard something underneath the static. A voice. Or maybe voices. Multiple overlapping conversations, too distant and distorted to make out words, but definitely human speech. Leonard turned up the volume, straining to hear. The voices became clearer, though still muffled by the static. He could pick out fragments. Coordinates are confirmed, and Anu do not acknowledge, and a containment protocol initiated. The voices had an urgent quality, professional but stressed, like emergency responders or military personnel, dealing with a crisis. Then one voice came through clearly, cutting through the static like it was speaking directly into Leonard's cab. Unit 7. This is command. The subject has breached primary containment and is moving west on Highway 95. Intercept and recontain. Lethal force authorized if necessary. Acknowledge. Leonard's hands tightened on the wheel. This sounded like some kind of official operation, but why was it coming through his satellite radio? These channels were commercial, entertainment-focused. There shouldn't be military or emergency traffic on these frequencies. Another voice responded, Command Unit 7 acknowledging. We have negative visual on subject. Highway is clear. Only civilian traffic. Please confirm location. Unit 7, subject is mobile and evasive. Civilian vehicle in your sector, commercial truck, license plate. The voice read off a license plate number. Leonard's license plate number. His blood went cold. Vehicle may be compromised. Approach with extreme caution. Leonard's breath caught. They were talking about him. But what did compromised mean? He looked in his mirrors, seeing nothing but empty highway. Then he checked his trailer camera feed, which showed the interior of his cargo area. Furniture, all properly secured, nothing unusual. The radio voices continued their rapid-fire exchange. Unit 7 approaching civilian vehicle, no signs of external compromise, preparing to conduct stop and search. Leonard saw headlights approaching fast in his driver's side mirror, a black SUV, no markings, moving at high speed. It pulled alongside his truck, keeping pace. Leonard could see figures inside, at least 3 people wearing what looked like tactical gear. The passenger window rolled down and someone pointed a handheld spotlight directly at Leonard's face, blinding him. Pull over immediately, a voice commanded through a loudspeaker. This is a federal stop. Pull over now. Leonard's training said to comply with law enforcement, but every instinct screamed that something was wrong. These people weren't police. No marked vehicles, no proper identification process. And that radio traffic had said his vehicle may be compromised, like he was carrying something dangerous. He grabbed his CB radio. Breaker, breaker, this is Pacific Hauler on Highway 95. I'm being forced off the road by unmarked vehicles claiming to be federal agents. Can anyone confirm this is legitimate? Static answered him, but not normal static. The same weird static from his satellite radio with those voices underneath. And then, through the CB, he heard the command voice again. Subject is attempting communication. Increase signal jamming. Unit 7 force the stop. The SUV swerved toward Leonard's truck, trying to push him onto the shoulder. Leonard accelerated, his big rig pulling ahead with surprising power. The SUV matched his speed. His mirror, Leonard saw 2 more vehicles approaching from behind, more black SUVs, all moving with coordinated precision. Through his satellite radio, the voices escalated. Subject is refusing compliance. Subject may be aware of its status. Authorization to use force? Negative, command. We need the vehicle intact. The subject is inside the cargo area. We can't risk... Subject? Inside his cargo area? Leonard's eyes shot to his trailer camera again. The furniture was still secured, but now he noticed something he'd missed before. One of the wardrobes he was transporting, a large wooden antique piece, was rocking slightly. Not from road vibration, but deliberately, rhythmically. Like something inside was pushing against the doors. Leonard felt sick. He'd loaded this furniture himself in Portland, checked every piece. That wardrobe had been empty. He was certain. But as he watched the camera feed, the wardrobe door creaked open an inch, then 2 inches. Something pale was moving inside it, something that shouldn't fit in a space that size. The radio voice cut through his shock. Command. The subject is emerging. If the driver opens the trailer, we'll lose containment completely. Recommend immediate intervention. Unit 7, box the vehicle in and force the stop, now. The 3 SUVs coordinated their attack, one on each side and one behind, herding Leonard like he was a runaway animal. He had nowhere to go, empty desert on both sides, the road ahead clear but no escape from these pursuers. They were forcing him slower, using their vehicles to trap him into deceleration. The wardrobe on his camera feed was fully open now. What climbed out defied Leonard's ability to process. It was humanoid, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, joints bending in places that shouldn't have joints. Its skin was that pale color he'd glimpsed earlier, but translucent, showing shadows of internal structures that weren't organs he recognized. And its face, no features, just smooth skin where a face should be, except for a mouth that opened vertically instead of horizontally. The thing moved toward the front of the trailer, toward the thin wall separating the cargo area from Leonard's cab. It placed one elongated hand against the wall, and Leonard heard scratching, felt the impact through his seat. The radio voices were shouting now, overlapping. Subject is breaching, force the stop, force the stop. Leonard made a decision born of pure panic. He slammed on his brakes. The SUVs, caught off guard, shot past him. In the confusion, Leonard cranked his wheel and performed a jackknife turn that should have been impossible, his trailer swinging around in a wide arc. He straightened out facing the opposite direction and punched the accelerator, heading back north on 95, leaving the SUVs scrambling to turn around. His satellite radio exploded with frantic chatter. Vehicle is fleeing north. Subject is still contained in trailer. All units pursue. Do not let him reach populated areas. Leonard drove like he'd never driven before, pushing his truck to 85 miles per hour, the trailer swaying dangerously behind him. The thing inside was going crazy, slamming against the walls, and Leonard could hear it through the thin barrier, a shrieking sound that was almost ultrasonic, setting his teeth on edge. The SUVs were catching up, these vehicles clearly faster than his loaded truck. Ahead, Leonard saw lights, a small town, maybe just a gas station and a few buildings, but people, witnesses, safety. He aimed for it, hoping these mysterious agents wouldn't risk exposure in front of civilians. As he approached the lights, his satellite radio went dead, along with his CB, his GPS, and every other electronic system except his engine and basic controls. The truck was running, but all communications were killed. The SUVs fell back, maintaining distance but not pursuing into the lit area. Leonard pulled into the gas station, jumped out, and immediately started unhitching his trailer. His hands shook so badly he could barely work the fifth wheel release, but adrenaline kept him moving. He got it disconnected, jumped back in his cab, and drove away, leaving the trailer sitting in the gas station parking lot. He drove north for 2 hours before stopping at a state police office. He tried to explain the voices, the SUVs, the thing in his trailer, but his story sounded insane even to himself. The officers were polite but skeptical. They contacted Nevada Highway Patrol about the abandoned trailer. Leonard waited, expecting, he didn't know what. Arrest? More mysterious agents? Instead, hours later, a highway patrol officer returned with news. We found your trailer empty, no cargo, no furniture, nothing inside except some scratches on the interior walls. You sure you loaded furniture into it? I loaded 8 pieces personally, Leonard insisted. There were chairs, a table, 2 wardrobes. Well, they're gone now, trailer's clean. You file an insurance claim for stolen cargo, but we've got no evidence of forced entry. The trailer was still locked when we found it. Leonard never saw his cargo again. His satellite radio never worked properly after that night. producing random static and occasional fragments of those voices no matter how many times he had it replaced. He sold that truck 3 months later and bought an older model with minimal electronics. No satellite radio, no complex systems, just basic AM/FM and a CB. Leonard Jacoby still hauls furniture, but he inspects every piece multiple times now, checking inside wardrobes and drawers, making absolutely certain nothing is hiding in his cargo. And he never drives Highway 95 in Nevada, especially not at night, because he knows there are frequencies his radio could pick up that carry conversations about things that shouldn't exist. Operations that track, subjects that escape containment, and sometimes civilian trucks get caught in the middle of something that no one will ever officially acknowledge happened. He still wonders what that thing was, where it came from, and whether those agents ever recaptured it. And sometimes when he's driving late at night and his basic AM radio picks up interference between stations, he'll hear fragments of voices in the static, urgent and professional, coordinating hunts for subjects that have breached containment. When that happens, Leonard turns the radio off completely and drives in silence, refusing to hear any more than he already has. Story 10. The Town That Wasn't There Yesterday. Raymond Torres prided himself on knowing every town, every landmark, every truck stop on his regular routes. With 42 years of experience, he'd earned the nickname the Atlas among his colleagues for his encyclopedic knowledge of American highways. So when a fully developed town appeared in the middle of Kansas farmland where nothing but empty fields had existed the day before, Raymond knew he wasn't dealing with faulty memory or navigation errors. He was dealing with something that violated every law of reality he understood. The date was August 7th, 2020. Raymond was running his usual weekly circuit from Topeka, Kansas to Dodge City and back, hauling agricultural equipment. He'd made this exact drive hundreds of times over the past 15 years, every Monday and Friday like clockwork. He knew every curve, every exit, every mile marker on Highway 56. 30 miles west of Topeka, in an area Raymond knew was nothing but wheat fields and the occasional distant farmhouse, he saw buildings. Not one or two buildings, an entire town, complete with a water tower, grain elevators, church steeple, and what looked like a downtown commercial district. The highway led straight through the center of it. Raymond slowed his truck, confused. This wasn't here on Friday. 3 days ago, this stretch was empty. He would have bet his life on it. He checked his GPS. It showed no town at this location, just blank space between marked communities. But through his windshield, the town was undeniably real. Buildings, streets, parked cars, even people walking on sidewalks. A sign at the town limits read, "Welcome to Millbrook, population 1847, founded 1889. Raymond had never heard of Millbrook, Kansas, and he knew he would have if it had existed. This was impossible. He drove slowly into town, watching carefully. Everything looked normal. Businesses with painted signs, a hardware store, a diner, a post office, houses lining residential streets. But something felt wrong. The details were too perfect, like a movie set. The paint was too fresh. The cars were there, but all parked, no one driving. The people on the sidewalks moved, but they walked in repetitive patterns like NPCs in a video game. Raymond pulled into the parking lot of the diner, Millbrook, family restaurant, according to the sign. He needed to understand what was happening. Maybe he'd had a stroke, a mental break. He got out of his truck, his legs feeling unsteady. The diner door opened with a cheerful bell chime. Inside, it looked like every small-town diner Raymond had ever seen. Counter with stools, booths along the windows, pie case by the register, smell of coffee and fried food. A waitress behind the counter looked up and smiled. "Afternoon. Sit anywhere you like, hun." Raymond sat at the counter, his mind spinning. "How long has this town been here?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The waitress tilted her head, that smile never wavering. Millbrook? Oh, we've been here since 1889, says so right on the sign coming in. Can I get you some coffee? No, I mean, I drive this highway all the time. I've never seen this town before. It wasn't here on Friday. Her smile flickered just for a fraction of a second. Must have missed it. Easy to do, small town like ours. Folks drive right past sometimes without noticing. What can I get you to eat? Raymond ordered coffee and pie, watching her pour from a pot that never seemed to empty. The other diners, 3 men in farmer attire, a couple in a booth, sat motionless, coffee cups raised or forks held but not moving, like someone had pressed pause on them. When the waitress turned away, they animated again, taking sips, chewing, but when she looked back, they froze mid-motion. Raymond's hands trembled as he picked up his coffee cup. The coffee was hot, tasted normal, but something about it felt wrong, like the flavor was an approximation of coffee rather than the real thing. "Why are you here?" Raymond asked quietly. "What is this place?" The waitress's smile finally dropped. Her face became expressionless, neutral, and when she spoke, her voice had changed. Flatter, without regional accent. "You're not supposed to ask questions. You're supposed to pass through, maybe stop for coffee, then leave and forget you saw us. Most people do. They drive through, see a normal town, maybe stop or maybe don't, and by the next day they don't even remember it. But you're different. You're observant. You remember. That's problematic." "What are you?" Raymond's voice was barely a whisper. "We're a test," she said. "An experiment in localized reality manipulation. Millbrook doesn't exist in your normal timeline. We phase in and out, appearing in different locations, observing how people react, how reality adjusts. Most drivers see us and their brains rationalize it. They assume they just forgot the town was there. Memory is flexible. Reality is flexible. But you, Raymond Torres, you know with certainty this town wasn't here before. That makes you an anomaly." Raymond stood up, backing toward the door. The other diners turned their heads in unison to watch him, their movements synchronized and mechanical. "I'm leaving." "You can try," the waitress said, "but Millbrook doesn't like anomalies. The town has certain protocols for dealing with observers who see too clearly." Raymond ran for his truck, the bell above the diner door jingling cheerfully as he burst through. He jumped into his cab, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot fast, his trailer swaying. He drove through town toward the western exit, watching in his mirrors as the waitress stood in the diner doorway, still watching him with that neutral expression. The town seemed to stretch as he drove. Streets appeared that he hadn't seen on the way in, intersections that forced him to turn, detours that led him in circles. He kept ending up back at the same church, the same grain elevator, the same hardware store. The town was keeping him, not letting him find the exit. His GPS was useless, showing him an empty farmland while buildings surrounded him. His phone had no signal. The CB radio produced only silence, not even static. Raymond was trapped in a town that shouldn't exist, and it was becoming clear that the town intended to keep him here. The sun began to set. Too fast, way too fast, the light fading in minutes instead of hours. As darkness fell, the town changed. The perfect facades cracked and peeled. Buildings that had looked solid revealed themselves as flat fronts with nothing behind them. The parked cars were empty shells, windows painted on, and the people stopped pretending to be human. They stood motionless on corners, facing Raymond's truck as he passed, their features smoothing away into blank mannequin faces. Raymond drove faster, panic overriding caution. He saw the town limit sign ahead, the one he'd passed coming in. He accelerated toward it, desperate to cross that boundary. But as he approached, the road ahead rippled like water, and when the ripple passed, the sign was behind him again. The town had rotated, rearranged itself, preventing his escape. This continued for hours. Every route led back to the center. Every escape attempt ended with reality reshuffling, putting him back where he started. His fuel gauge was dropping toward empty. Eventually, he'd run out of diesel, and then what? Would he become part of the town, another frozen figure in this impossible place? Then he had an idea. The town was a test, an experiment. Experiments had controllers, observers, people running the show. And if this was a test, maybe there was a way to fail it deliberately, to force the experimenters to intervene. Raymond drove his truck straight toward the church, the most solid-looking building in town. He accelerated to 40 miles per hour and aimed his rig directly at the front entrance. If this was all fake, maybe destroying it would break the illusion. His truck hit the church steps and plowed through the front doors. The building resisted for a moment, then collapsed like cardboard, revealing what was. Behind, a void, absolute darkness, an emptiness that hurt to look at. Raymond slammed on his brakes, stopping with his cab hanging over the edge of that nothingness. A voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere. Experiment terminated. Subject has breached containment protocols. Reset in progress. The world flashed white. Raymond felt a sensation like falling upward, a moment of complete disorientation. Then he was back in his truck in daylight on Highway 56. The town was gone. The surrounding landscape was empty farmland, exactly as it should be. His GPS showed his normal position. His phone had signal. Everything was back to normal. But Raymond's clock showed 4:47 p.m., the same time it had been when he'd first entered Millbrook hours ago, according to his experience. No time had passed in the real world, or he'd been returned to the moment before he'd entered the town, like someone had hit an undo button on reality. Raymond pulled over to the shoulder and sat there, shaking for 20 minutes. Then he called his dispatcher and said he was sick, couldn't complete the run. He drove back to Topeka, parked his truck, and took 2 weeks off. During that time, he researched obsessively, looking for any mention of Millbrook, Kansas, or similar phenomena. He found scattered reports, towns that appeared and disappeared, locations that existed for some people but not others, places that were experiments or tests or glitches in reality itself. Raymond Torres kept driving after his recovery time, but he transferred to a different route, one that didn't take him through that section of Highway 56. He couldn't risk encountering Millbrook again, couldn't risk being labeled an anomaly a second time, because the waitress's words haunted him. Millbrook doesn't like anomalies. The town has certain protocols for dealing with observers who see too clearly. And Raymond had seen too clearly. He'd seen the void behind the false facades, the emptiness where reality was supposed to be. He'd breached their containment, forced a reset. Would they let him go permanently, or was he marked now, flagged in whatever system controlled these experiments? He still drives that highway sometimes when his company needs him on that route, but he drives it with his eyes fixed firmly on the white line, refusing to look too carefully at the landscape on either side. Because he knows now that reality is thinner than it appears, that entire towns can phase in and out of existence, and that some experiments treat human beings as test subjects without consent or warning. And Raymond has no intention of being selected for testing again.